Hey everyone, I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to look at three zoo decks that you could take to your local RCQ and win it. These are all decks that have done pretty well competitively. Some of them have top 8 challenges, some of them have 1 RCQs. So there's a few different options. So because I get a lot of questions about card choices, and it's like, hey, what build of zoo is best? So I thought I'd just highlight a few different options. Right now, I don't really think there's one best build. I do have my sideboard guide that's in the description. It's free. You can check it out. And that includes like my preferred build right now. However, I do think there's actually like a few great options, and it's kind of meta dependent. And also, we just have to see if one of these lists shakes out as superior to the others. But right now it seems like there's a few great options to play. So starting off here, we've got what I'm calling Bowmaster Zoo. So this is a deck that a player on Magic Online named the Rat Zoo pilots very successfully. So he does really well in prelims. I think he's had a few challenge finishes that are strong. So this is the version he's playing. You'll see in a couple of these lists, the stock shell is going to look similar. There is one list that's completely different. That's going to be the third deck. That's the spiciest and just kind of a wild brew, but it has already had some success with, I think, a player won an RCQ with it. So stay tuned for that third list. But moving to the first list, so basically we've got the same shell. We're on 21 lands, which if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that this is kind of the shell we like. This is the mana base we like, and he's got a basic forest and a basic plains. And then really his only different thing, we've got all the classic 4-ofs. He's trimmed 1 Neshoba Brawler, so he's running 3 Brawlers, and that's to fit in his 4 Bowmasters. So we know Bowmasters is a great card in Modern right now. There's a potential for it to get even more of a boost because now we're starting to see 4-color Omnath with Up the Beanstalk coming back. So if you're expecting a lot of Omnath in your meta, a lot of those decks that are trying to draw a lot of cards, so basically Omnath, Murktide, things like that, then I think Bowmasters in the main deck could be a really good choice. He's playing all 4 of them. I've tested a playset. I've also tested 3. I think for me, I like 3, but again, it's going to be very small difference between 3 versus 4. But yeah, this is going to be really good in those, like I said, those matchups that are drawing cards like Murktide and Omnath. It can be a little dead in certain matchups. There's some combo matchups, things like Tron, maybe even like Burn, like decks where it's just not going to be that relevant. Like they're not playing X and 1 creatures. They're not drawing a lot of extra cards, or it's just not going to be that helpful. But that's why it's kind of in that flex slot here. So that's what we have going on in the main deck. And then the sideboard is kind of a lot of the usual suspects you'd see in the sideboard: Chain to the Rocks, Flusterstorm, Natural State, Veil of Summer, and he's playing Reprieve. So this could be another good choice in your sideboard. Again, if you're starting to see a lot more of those Omnath decks, then Reprieve could be a good choice because a lot of their win cons are going to be those big 4-mana spells. So that whether that's Omnath or One Ring, that's how they're going to kind of run away with the game. So being able to Reprieve that on turn 3 or turn 4 can be a very big deal, and it can be enough to win the game too, especially if they're relying on that casting of the One Ring to give them protection for a turn, buy another turn, find them more pitch spells, things like that. The rest is pretty classic. Still love Terror Sunder. It hits all sorts of artifacts and enchantments. Urza Saga hits One Ring. And then late game, you can also use it to exile any non-land permanent. So it can hit Elesh Norn, Omnath, things like that. And then Hidetsugu is that board wipe. So yeah, if you're expecting that, or if you want to give Bowmasters a spin, I think this is a great choice. You get to play like the new, most powerful card in Modern, or one of the more powerful cards. If you're expecting a lot of One Ring decks, a lot of card draw, Murktide, things like that, I think it's a great choice. Moving on to the second deck. This is a deck that's piloted by Mr. T on Magic Online. He finishes very highly in the challenges. Most recently, last weekend, he finished 3rd overall in the Modern Challenge. And he is playing the shell with Preordain and Tarmogoyf. We've seen a lot of new decks come out. Beanstalk now coming out to kind of reshape some of the decks in Modern. You had the Preordain unban that happened after the Lord of the Rings set came out. So if you saw me playing Bowmaster, I like Bowmaster a lot in those flex slots. We just saw that in the first deck. And then now we have Preordain. And if you know from my sideboard guide, this is similar to the version I prefer. So I am playing 3 Preordain in my version. Mr. T is playing 4 Preordain, and then he's playing Tarmogoyf. So I get questions about, like, is Tarmogoyf better than Brawler? And I really think you can play either. It kind of depends on, I would test both and see what you like better for your meta, your play preferences, things like that. The upsides of Tarmogoyf are that it's more resilient to Blood Moon. It's going to be larger as a late game threat, and it's not going to die to Lightning Bolt. So those are kind of the three like big upsides. The downsides of Tarmogoyf is you're going to have it less consistent in the early game, because if you play Tarmogoyf on turn 2 or sometimes even on turn 3 against decks that don't really fill our graveyard, with us being Zoo doesn't really fill its graveyard that much either, because usually on turn 1 you're going to either maybe like fetch a Triome or you're going to play a 1-drop creature. So you might be playing against another deck that like maybe it's Hammer Time, maybe it's any sort of like combo deck like Amulet Titan. Like there's just a lot of decks that do not fill their graveyard. Like yes, like Murktide is going to fill its graveyard. So but there's just decks that sometimes you'll find that like the Tarmogoyf won't be big enough to enable Stubby D, which can be a problem. So like, yes, you might be able to play it as a 3/4, but then you're like on turn 3 or later, you're having issues because you're trying to enable your stub and you can't. So that's just something to consider, but there's definitely pros and cons to it. So how do I like Preordain? If you know me, this is the shell I like, and I do really like Preordain. So is Preordain better than Bowmaster? I think it's kind of, I'm not certain, but they're both very strong. The key with Preordain for how I use it, and I'm running 3 copies because I'm really only going to cast it in general on turn 3 or later. So what I like to do is keep like a decent hand with Preordain, and then play out my hand as expected, from what I have in hand. So we're not really a deck that wants to cantrip on turn 1, because we don't really get a lot of synergies from that. So yes, you could in some cases keep a 1-lander and then Preordain to try to find a second land. Sometimes that makes sense. Maybe if you have a 5 or something. It can be a little risky though, because our mana requirements, being a domain mana base, are so specific that like, if you keep a fetch land and then Preordain on turn 1, you have to basically either find another fetch land. If you find another shock that's like not the right shock, or a Triome that's not the right Triome, it can get clunky pretty fast. So that's something to consider. But I really like Preordain on turn 3 or later, because there you can cast it on turn 3. Say you have 3 mana, or you can cast it on turn 3 to find that third land, and then you can play another 2-drop. And that's kind of like really has helped me to close out a lot of games. Is maybe I run out of action, or I'm looking for a specific spell. Like I need that Leyline Binding, I need that stub, I need the Tribal Flames, I need another big threat to close out the game. That's where Preordain can come in really clutch as a 1-mana, because again, our deck is all 1 and 2 drops, and unlike Expressive Iteration, where if you try to cast an iteration on turn 3, you're not really doing anything that turn. You're casting the iteration, you're gonna like Dirtle for a while, because we just don't have that many impactful 1-drops. Like we do have Bolt and stuff like that, but whereas if you cast Preordain on turn 3, again, you can play another Kavu, play a Scion, play Tarmogoyf in this instance, play Tribal Flame. So there's just a lot of options, and that's really why I like Preordain, because it's kind of just good at any time you need to dig for the answer. So it's going to be really good too in those grindy matchups, that especially against like discard decks. It's going to be good against Scam. It's going to be good against Murktide, because if you top deck this late game, now you can just dig even further for that answer that you're looking for. Sideboard, the one consideration too with you're playing Tarmogoyf is you are going to have to change your sideboard a bit. So you don't want to place cards that exile all graveyards, like Rest in Peace or Hidetsu Consumes All, because that's going to shrink your own Goyf. So what you're going to do is play cards that exile opponents' graveyards. So that's what Mr. T right here is going with a mix of 2 Nile Spellbombs and then 1 Unlicensed Hearse. So I think these are going to be good choices. And in fact, there are matchups where Nile Spellbomb or Hearse are better than Rest in Peace. For example, against Scam, I don't really want to bring in Rest in Peace, but I could bring in something like Unlicensed Hearse, because that's also a late game threat, so it can be very effective. So it's just something to consider. He's got 1 Alpine Moon. I think that's probably for his Urza Saga matchups. Might also be for Tron and things like that, although I found the Tron matchup to usually be pretty favorable no matter what version of Zoo you're playing, as long as it's roughly an aggressive shell. And then, again, since I said Hidetsu Consumes All will exile all graveyards on Chapter 2, you don't want to play that with your Tarmogoyf. So instead, we've got a mix of sweepers here. He's playing Engineered Explosives as well as the Filigree Silex. The reason you want to play a mix of these instead of just 2 Engineered Explosives is that Pithing Needle is a common card with the 1 ring everywhere. So decks like Hammer Time will play Pithing Needle. So if you are just playing Engineered Explosives, there's a very good chance that they will needle explosives from Urza Saga or something like that. So playing this mix means that, maybe they needle explosives, you have Silex in hand, it just makes it harder for them to deal with. I actually think Silex in some ways can also be better against specifically Hammer Time, because you have the option to tick it up to 1 or keep it at 0. So, if there's some optionality there where maybe you keep it at 0 for a while and then like, oh, it's more advantageous to take it up to 1, you can take it up to 1. Whereas Engineer Explosive, you're stuck with whatever it is that you cast it on originally, whether that's 1 or 2. And then the rest of the sideboard's kind of the same as what we saw in the previous list, all the same cards. So this is another great pick, and Mr. T has been doing well with this deck for, he's getting good results in the challenge for over a month. So it's not like, the meta is shifting a little bit in Modern, but like this is still a great choice. So it's not like you need to, change your deck choices every few weeks in Modern because the meta is changing so much. You certainly can, but you can also kind of just stick with this same shell, throughout the RCQ season, and you're going to probably get good results. This is the last deck, and I said it would be the spiciest. This is a Dak Faden 07 brew, and it's called BeanFlayer Zoo. So you can check him out on YouTube. He does have a league gameplay with this deck. I have played it for a league or two. It was off stream, and it went pretty well, actually. There is a player, I think I saw results online who also, I'm not sure if they top 2'd in RCQ. Yeah, I think they finished second in RCQ. I'm not sure if it was a 2-slotter or a 1-slotter, but they were playing this deck. So what is this deck trying to do? First of all, we're taking advantage of Up the Beanstalk. So this is kind of the new hotness in Modern from the recent set. Like I said, it's in on the Omnath list, but this is a deck that synergizes really well with it because we're playing a lot of 5-drops. So we've got or 5 drops or more. So here basically are all the cards that we have that will trigger Beanstalk. So that's 16 cards, which is pretty good because some of the Omnath lists and stuff are only playing 12 cards to trigger it. So this is going to get a lot of value out of Beanstalk just with these cards. And if you notice, 8 of these are already cards that we play normally in a Domain Zoo shell. We've also got Fury. That's going to help a lot with that early game interaction, can help to trigger Beanstalk, or you can cast it for 5. It's a pitch elemental. It's good. So, but what the other thing we're trying to do is kind of the combo kill of the deck, if you will, is playing Soulflayer. So this is a delve creature. This is also going to trigger your Beanstalk, and it's basically going to get the ability of any creature that you delve with it. And that is why we're playing a few cyclers as well as some 3 and 4 drops that you don't traditionally see. So first off, we have the cyclers. That's going to be Oliphant. That's the land cycler. We've seen it in Living End, things like that. This will go in your graveyard and give you Trample, which is a useful ability for Soulflayer. We've also got Striped Riverwinder. Again, that's something you'd see in Living End. And the big thing with this is giving hexproof, because you can often win against decks, especially Omnath, and really most decks. If you get a Striped Riverwinder in the graveyard and you resolve a Soulflayer, the game is going to be over, because you're going to basically have a 4/4 hexproof, and your opponent just doesn't really have a way to deal with it. We've got other card. We got Territorial Kabu, just because you can use his loot ability to put cards in the graveyard, or he's just good play as a threat. The 5/5, so we like him in all our zoo lists. We do have Lightning Bolt that can help you to close out the game, as some early removal, things like that. And then we're playing these kind of suite of creatures you're not used to seeing. One of them is Samut, Vizier of Noctumen. So he's someone with First Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. Again, we're trying to play creatures that have a lot of these special abilities, those key texts, to give Soulflayer those abilities, right? So if we give Soulflayer, if we delve one of these creatures and we give her Soulflayer, First Strike, Vigilance, and Haste, that's going to be very useful, especially when we're talking about in combination with other cards like maybe we give Soulflayer Double Strike, maybe we give it Hexproof, maybe we get Trample, things like that. Fury is going to be going the yard a lot because you're going to be pitching, evoking it, and then that means your Soulflayer is going to get Double Strike, which is a big deal, because it'll act a lot kind of like a Murktide does for closing out the game for a Murktide deck. But you can also happen to give it hexproof too, so it's just very hard to deal with for most decks. You got Mantis Rider. This is going to give you similar kind of thing, that flying, vigilance, haste. Haste is a big deal. Flying is also a big deal, so your opponent can't chump it, but haste is a big deal because that means you can pay that 2 mana on turn 3, cast your Soulflayer, and immediately swing in for 4 or 8 or however much it is, depending on what's in your graveyard. So that's another reason. We do have a split. You could play 4 Mantis Rider, but I found that Samut can be a bit easier on the mana, because you can get a basic forest and now you can cast Samut through Blood Moon. It's just a little easier to cast. Whereas Mantis Rider, you have to be very careful with your fetch lands and your sequencing to get the right sequence to be able to cast Mantis Rider. And then we've got the 2 of Questing Beasts. You see this in some Rhinos decks. It's very good against One Ring, but again, we're also, it's really nice to hard cast, because 4 mana for a 4, in a deck like this, 4 mana for a 4/4 that has haste is actually pretty good, because we're tend to pressure the opponent, deal some damage. But we're also looking at for the keywords. So things like Death Touch, Vigilance, and Haste. So again, just another thing that you want to give your Soulflayer haste, but it's also a good threat just to play. So that's kind of the idea with Questing Beasts. And then, of course, we've got over here, I talked about Fury. We got Scion of Draco. It synergizes really well with Soulflayer. If you get Scion in the graveyard, then that means your Soulflayer is going to get flying. but also it gives your Soulflare lifelink, which can be relevant in matchups that are pressuring your life total. We've got Leyline Binding. It's always good. It's even better with Beanstalk because you'll draw more cards. And then, like I said, Soulflare is kind of the beatdown plan. And then looking at the sideboard, we do have Stubby D, but it's in the sideboard. So, if you're expecting a lot of combo decks, you'll bring in Stubby D, but it's not in the main deck. We got 2 Besejus. This is going to just help you with that artifact enchantment hate. And then we've got 3 Endurance. That's going to be your graveyard hate. We've got our 2 Terra Sunders. That's going to, again, artifact enchantment hate. You also have Force of Vigor. So you've got this kind of split here. That's just to also hedge against things like One Ring or other decks where Force of Vigor is not as good. But we do like, since we have no Gigantha in this deck, we do like to use some of those pitch spells because they're very powerful. And then you're also playing Murderous Cut. This is actually a very strong card with up to Beanstalk. So again, we're going to be tending to fill our graveyard a little more with some of these cyclers and trying to get things in there with Soulflare. But Murderous Cut is kind of that 1 mana answer to everything, to every creature, and it also trigger Beanstalk being 5 mana. So it's just another nice like synergy card when you want some extra removal. It's good against a lot of decks. So again, I think this deck, at first glance, it looks kind of like really off the wall, and you're like, how does this thing win? But I have played it through a few leagues, and it's actually very powerful. It looks like it would be clunky, and maybe it could be a little clunky, but you're going to see a lot of cards with Beanstalk, and you're going to you still have that core of Kavu, Scion, Leyline Binding, Bolt, and then you're going to just see extra cards, and now you have some like 3 and 4 drops that are decent, and of course, like Soulflare is just such a good win con. Like I said, you can resolve it as early as turn 3, and then he just takes over the game, and that ends the game pretty quickly. So overall, I think this is like a very spicy list to play, but I do think it is also very competitive. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this kind of video. This is just an overview of 3 lists I've seen that were kind of like doing well recently, because I get a lot of questions about what should I play for the RCQ, things like that. You can check out my free sideboard guide. It's in the description below. If you want to support me, you can subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.